Crime procedurals. Everybody knows them. Everybody watches them from time to time. You have a team of detectives, or maybe just one detective, working for the police, solving a new crime week after week, and conveniently wrapping them up in 45 minutes. Let's be honest, the majority of people who watch crime procedurals do so because they've nothing better to do, or because it's a guilty pleasure, because let's be honest, they are kind of cool, but they are also kind of shit. It is rare that something like The Wire comes along, which, to be honest, isn't in any way like a traditional crime procedural, because they take a lot more time for the individual case stories and have a lot of different perspectives in there that you wouldn't have in an ordinary crime procedural. Characters often fall pretty flat considering the amount of time we spend with them. Showrunners often introduce significant and big drama that should have massive changes and impacts on these characters, but they ultimately change them very little because we don't want to overwhelm the viewers with characters that actually suffer from PTSD from all the horrible shit that has happened on the job. There's a German crime procedural called Alarm for Cobra 11, The Highway Police, and the main character, Semir Gerkan, has lost 4 partners who have died. A lot of partners he has lost because they sort of left. 4 of them died. Imagine if 4 times the person you trust with the most in battlefield situations, because this show has battlefield situations all the fucking time, just dies, and this happens to you repeatedly. You would imagine that this character is completely wrecked psychologically, but really the only thing that happened is that he married a secretary and then she became his wife over the course of his show, and he had a kid, and whenever one of the characters dies, he has a few episodes where he mourns them, and then there's a new partner and everything's fine. And that just feels, you know, bullshit. Then you have all this shallow drama like who fucked who, nobody cares bollocks that just is incredibly slow-paced and drags out over huge amounts of episodes just to give watchers a bit of a sense that things are changing, but to also placate those who don't watch every episode so that all the characters are still the same if you sort of miss 10 cases. Then you have jurisdiction issues wherein one show can only treat one kind of crime. Most of them do with murder. There are some about kidnapping, some about drugs, some about sex crimes, right? Like, you know, a special victims unit. Because realistically, police officers do have their fields of expertise, and a murder cop isn't gonna be called in on a kidnapping. As a matter of fact, kidnapping cops are gonna be called in, and if the murder cop tries to get in there, they will say, "No, please back off, we will let you know if there is a murder involved." So with one show, you limit yourself massively in the scope of what you can actually do in terms of stories that you can tell. Eventually you just ask yourself, how many serial killers are there in this one city? And also you ask, really there's an interesting crime case every week that it always wraps up quickly? You cannot set up a complex case and resolve it in 45 minutes. It's just not really doable. But because of the timetables that the characters are on, and because of the timetables that the showrunners are on, and because the showrunners don't want to shoot all of their special powder as quickly as possible, they always want to withhold something so people have to keep watching, and it eventually just doesn't taste very good if the show was a dish. Well, it's a bit And when you go the exact opposite route, like The Wire does, which does have these huge complex cases that stretch for an entire season, and the characters get carried over and there's always a new element in there and the things change, you do have to watch every episode because otherwise you're gonna lose the plot. And also the set pieces just get stale eventually. I mean, yeah, New York is a huge city, but there are only so many interesting places and interesting lives that you can tell in there without eventually the city just being where the story takes place and not part of the story, as ideally it ought to be. I am here today to pitch you a format that will resolve all of these problems and make crime procedurals great again. The first thing you do is you abandon the idea of one show, one city. Every single new episode is set in a different city and thus has a different cast of main characters. You come back to cities, you don't even need to cycle through them, they can be pretty random how you go back to them, and different cities can be on screen more frequently than others, but it's very important to have different cities, different teams, different characters with different dynamics. So while you have your flagship teams and cities that may get 10 episodes per year, others may get like 1 or 2 only. And you don't just have different casts, you have different production crews, different producers, different directors, different writers, different people on the ground. Ideally, you would use locals for this, who really know their city well and can showcase it in the best way possible and in the most interesting way possible, as opposed to some producer from LA trying to make a crime story in Denver, or Sioux Falls, or fucking Orlando, Florida. That's not really gonna be those cities. That's just gonna be some producer who read a Wikipedia article and all the scenes were shot in Vancouver. You want little in the way of oversight and little in the way of streamlining the project to make the format similar, because you want every individual city to develop their individual way of telling the story, their individual flavor, and their individual tone. Also, abandon the idea of 45 minutes. Doesn't work. You need more time to develop more complex storylines and to delve more deeply into the character relationships and setting them up properly. Thus, you make 90-minute episodes, like a feature film. And even though episodes are longer, you can do a lot more with them. You can cut out all of the dull stuff, all of the filler that it just put in to pad out airtime, because you always have enough story to tell if you have a good story to tell, if you have good characters, and if you have people who know how to tell a good story. You can introduce new locations, change out characters, switch entire themes, because people do not expect much continuity. They do want to see the same characters again eventually, but we accept at that point that what we are seeing is vignettes out of their life, not a full picture. This is a crime procedural that easily could run for 25 seasons, because it's not a big deal to switch out the main character of one specific location. This could be a Sunday evening TV event that has the nation glued to their screens. You could screen this in cinemas and people would come watch. Another advantage is that each individual production team, because they only have to produce a handful of episodes per year, has a lot more time to make those good, flesh them out, and shoot them properly. At the same time, it wouldn't be so people involved in the production couldn't work on other projects, as is the case with people who are in larger shows who maybe get a cameo in a feature film or something, but otherwise it's difficult, scheduling-wise, to do 2 television shows per year. Here the actors could be tied up in a different show, and it's more easy to schedule around that, and they could cross-pollinate the fandoms of these 2 shows, and because you would be using locals even down to the actors ideally, you could probably get some big names that are willing to work for a little less than they would usually be paid, because this means that they can showcase their hometown to the nation. The creative freedom and the ability to tell interesting stories about your hometown would generally create a sense of passion that few other shows could generate. And as everybody knows, if the artists pours their heart into the art, people notice. You also have the opportunity to show a lot of minor locales as the main star of the show, because I am tired of seeing crime shows that are in New York or LA, or even San Francisco. I know all about these cities that I will ever want to know. I would love to see locations highlighted in this crime procedural that aren't as common or popular as other locations. You could easily have a story in Des Moines and it would be super interesting, because all of these smaller cities, or sometimes not even smaller cities, but cities with a smaller media presence, have a lot of very interesting stories to tell, and we just never get to hear them. And then, if we get to have crossover episodes between 2 cities, oh my god, people love crossover episodes. The fan service would be enormous. And I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, well, that sounds nice. I would like to see it, but I don't think a format like that could ever work. Well, what if I told you that this format already exists? It's called Tatort, which means crime scene in German, and it does all of the things that I described above. It is an absolute cultural landmark in Germany. It's been running since 1970, with over 1,000 episodes released and a new one coming out every Sunday. They also still use the original intro from way back in the day, which is charming. Everyone has heard of Tatort. You would be hard-pressed to find a person in Germany who hasn't at least watched a single episode of Tatort. People talk about Tatort. It is a massive TV success. Tatort has shown us 23 different cities in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland over the years, 22 of which are currently still active, where production is going on. Right now you have Cologne, which is the city I was born in, you have Munich, you have the whole Schwarzwald region, you have Freiburg, you have Kiel, which is the city I currently reside in, you have the cultural capital of Germany, Weimar, you have Vienna, you have Dortmund, you have Hamburg, you have Lucerne in Switzerland, you have Frankfurt, Stuttgart, Hanover, Bremen, Wiesbaden, Ludwigshafen, Berlin, Dresden, Saarbrücken, Münster, and the Franken region. You don't need to worry about all the different characters that you don't know, because the show caters to that. It doesn't expect you to know everything about everyone. Every single one of these cities has a completely different style and flavor of making Tatort episodes. You have the new Hamburg Tatorts, where they recently changed up the format a little bit when in 2013 they got a new team on, and it's very action-packed. There's a lot of shooting guns, a lot of running across roofs, a lot of witty banter, like a really hardcore, cool buddy cop film. Cologne is more rough and pedestrian, telling very realistic and close to the heart stories. The Kiel one is very slow-paced and dramatic, often even a bit surrealistic. There are those cities who like to go all out on the noir detective tropes. There are cities where it's more funny and light-hearted. There are cities where they break the fourth wall all the time. And there are the artsy-fartsy cities where they actually shot a whole fucking 90-minute episode in one take. In Germany, around 8 to 13 million people tend to watch Tatort episode to episode, which 8 million is about 10% of the German population. So if we carry this over to the US, 10% of the US population would be around 33 million people. That's a third of the people who watch the Super Bowl each year. In Germany, Tatort is one of the top 5 most successful television shows of all time. And if we were to translate that into the rest of the world, also, it would be one of the most successful TV shows of all time. Because so many people watch Tatort, it sort of brings them together. And the show has a tendency of addressing social issues and not shying away from controversy while doing so, which is unusual for the public broadcasting companies that produce this show. And I think this precise format could work in a lot of other countries. North America, of course, being the obvious choice, and yes, I do say North America, because I think including Canada in that equation, and possibly even some episodes in Mexico, which could be done in Spanish like Narcos did, to engage the Spanish-speaking audience of the United States, which is huge. That would be massively interesting. You could have New York as the flagship show, where you can see the massive disparity between the rich and poor and have a lot of gritty cop action. Los Angeles could be more psychological thriller-esque, where you push back the glitz and glamour of the City of Angels to find drugs and desperation. New Orleans could be a wilder show with a lot of oddballs and maybe even a little bit of surrealism or, ooh, is this magic or is this mundane type situations, and a lot of beautiful shots of the bayou. In Albuquerque, you could have border crime, police corruption, and desert action. In Miami, you could have fast cars and cocaine running. You could have a slow-paced Washington where they talk about the difference between the ultra-wealthy and politically powerful DC and the otherwise impoverished and a little destitute Washington. In Honolulu, you could have sunshine, tourism, and crystal meth. Seattle, Baltimore, Boston, Orlando, Houston, St. Louis, Memphis, every city in the United States, or even any region, if you want to have something set in the Appalachians, could bring something interesting to the table, even if it's just 1 or 2 episodes per year. In Canada, you could have episodes in Toronto or Vancouver or Quebec. I do, however, believe that this show could be a lot more successful with regards to the difficulties that it involves in production and how reluctant a corporation would be to adopt such a concept in Britain. Because in Britain, they have the BBC, and I'm not sure just how much money PBS in America has. You'd have the London flagship, of course, where most of the episodes would be set, but you could have a lot of stuff in Glasgow, or Edinburgh, or Plymouth, or Cardiff, even like Cambridge if you want to go a little smaller. You could go to Liverpool or to Leeds. If you want to go to the whole of Britain, which I would highly recommend in that case, go to Dublin, go to Cork, go to Belfast. Maybe you want to include the whole Commonwealth. You could have stories in Sydney or Canberra or Wellington, or imagine a crime story in a place as weird as Hobart. If you want to stick with the Commonwealth idea, India, Nigeria, Singapore, possibly even Jamaica if you're feeling particularly adventurous. There are so many fascinating locales to be explored, so many interesting characters to be showcased, so many amazing stories to be told, and still, even if you do shoot 90 minutes and you put in a little more money than usual, crime procedurals are still really fucking cheap to shoot. Why do you think there are so many of them? This format has been demonstrated to work extremely well, long before on-demand services like HBO and Netflix even existed. And now that they do exist, I think that pairing those two things, ooh, the distribution would be amazing. I can imagine this being a blast and very artistically fulfilling for everyone involved in the production, and amazing to watch, very interesting and always very refreshing for anyone who watches. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know what you think about this particular format in the comments. If you have any questions about Tatort, I am by no means an expert. I just recently got into this and I wanted to pitch to you the format of how great this idea is and how well it could work in the Anglosphere. Like, comment, subscribe, consider supporting me on Patreon with a little bit of money so you get cool rewards, especially on the Discord server, which you should definitely join. In case you haven't heard, I'm not doing Twitch streams anymore, unfortunately, because they just take too much time out of my day and they don't help me in any way. In that spirit, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate all of you, and see you around, cunts.